Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. It was a story that took place a few years ago, a tale of triumph against an entitled neighbor who dared to trespass on my land. As a teenager, I witnessed my father and I confront this arrogant individual, standing up for our rights and the sanctity of our property. You see, my parents owned a vast piece of land, sprawling across 112 acres, some of it used for farming and the rest left unoccupied but well maintained. Unfortunately, trespassing and illegal dumping had become a recurring issue. Despite my father's efforts to fence and gate off the entire property, it seemed to do little to dissuade those who sought unauthorized access. ATV and quad bike tire marks became all too familiar, evidence of unwelcome visitors on our land. My father, a passionate gun enthusiast, had instilled in me a love for firearms. We spent countless hours honing our shooting skills, engaging in target practice and hunting excursions as the seasons dictated. Our camping trips on our land had become treasured memories, forging a strong bond between father, son, and our loyal chocolate Labrador Beau. As autumn descended, we embarked on yet another camping and hunting expedition. Driving deep into our property, approximately 1.5 miles away, we settled into a clearing my father had carefully prepared for our tent and fire. Excitement filled the air as we set up our guns and tree stands, eagerly anticipating the sight of majestic game. My chance finally came when a mature buck with magnificent antlers, at least 10 points, appeared before us. It was a moment that could mark my first hunting triumph, a trophy I would be immensely proud of. However, my first shot missed its mark, only grazing the deer's shoulder. The wounded animal fled, forcing us to track its blood trail for about 20 yards before we discovered it, still alive but suffering. My father swiftly ended its pain with a well-placed gunshot, though remorse tinged my heart. This incident reaffirmed my decision not to make hunting a regular practice. Not long after, the sound of an approaching engine shattered the tranquility. My father, now aware of the noise, joined me in listening attentively. 2 ATVs soon materialized, one carrying a kid younger than me, accompanied by a man who appeared to be his father. The man, sporting a beer gut and dressed in full camouflage, approached us with an aggressive demeanor, instantly startling our faithful companion, Beau, into a frenzy of barks. In an attempt to defuse the situation, my father approached the man, but Beau's barking persisted. Undeterred, the man berated our dog, venomously commanding him to shut the duck up. Sensing trouble, my father ushered Beau away and initiated a conversation with this unpleasant individual. To say that the man was hostile would be an understatement. He launched into a tirade, accusing my father of endangering his son with our gunfire. The absurdity of his claim left me initially bewildered. After all, we were on our own land. It slowly dawned on me that this man was not only a nuisance, but also an unapologetic jackass. When my father calmly explained that we were shooting into an area with a dense hillside as a backdrop, the man merely laughed, dismissing the safety concerns. Arrogantly, he declared that our shooting was illegal. At that moment, I mustered the courage to interject, informing him that it was deer season, and we possessed the necessary licenses. However, he swiftly silenced me, commanding me to shut my mouth and let the adults handle the conversation. With his patience wearing thin, my father asked, "Did you notice the no trespassing signs when you entered this land?" The man scoffed, claiming he had been using the land for months and had even created his own path of access. Astonished, my father clarified, "Are you aware that this is our land, not yours?" The man, oozing with smugness, insisted he knew the owner and had permission to use it. He threatened to call both the police and the owner to report our alleged illegal activities, child endangerment and trespassing. My father welcomed the call to the police, unfazed by the man's threats. He promptly dialed my mother, instructing her to bring the property deed and our surveyor's paperwork. Meanwhile, we loaded the deer into the back of our truck, only fueling the man's taunting remarks. "Can't wait for the cops to seize that illegally killed deer," he jeered, poisoning his young son's mind against us. A giant turd of a man indeed. I couldn't help but feel sympathy for the young boy caught in the midst of this unpleasant encounter. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the police arrived, their annoyance at the situation palpable. They wasted no time redirecting their irritation toward the rightful culprit. The officer approached us first, acknowledging my father's ownership by perusing the property paperwork, even complimenting me on my first deer. "A 10-point buck for a 15-year-old? Impressive, kid," he exclaimed, patting me on the shoulder. He advised my father and me to remain calm and assured us that he would swiftly resolve the matter. The officer then turned his attention to the man, who eagerly regaled him with tales of knowing the landowner and possessing permission to use the property. When pressed to reveal the owner's name, he conveniently suffered from a sudden bout of amnesia. With a nod in our direction, the officer deftly pointed out, "Right, because they own the land." Panic washed over the ATV rider as the officer continued. "Did you notice the no trespassing signs when you entered?" It became increasingly clear that the man was cornered. To our satisfaction, the officer uncovered additional charges against him, stacking the deck against his reckless behavior. As the man stuttered and stumbled through his explanation, the officer inquired about vehicle registration. His response, neither ATV was registered, led to further penalties, compounding his legal woes. Defeated, the man left with his tail between his legs. He and his son trudged back to their vehicle, pushing their ATVs along while enduring the weight of trespassing fines and penalties for unregistered vehicles. As we drove past them, my father couldn't resist a parting shot. "Hey, I'd offer you a lift, but the deer in my truck bed takes up all the space." With a satisfied smile, we left the scene, our land once again secure. Our encounter with the entitled neighbor had transformed into a resounding victory for justice. This experience remains etched in my memory, a testament to my father's resilience and the importance of standing up for what is rightfully ours. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Set the scene. The place we were renting is a duplex that is split down the middle here in upstate NY. My little two-bedroom side of the house was next to the garages and driveway. It had a small side of the yard, which was 15 feet x 5 feet. We have a chocolate lab named Benny that uses that backyard for his bathroom, etc. The neighbor in my duplex, whom I'll call Rick, had the bigger side of the yard and a staircase that led up to the back field where there was a nice walking path and a horse farm. The back of our duplex was built into the side of the hill leading up to the horse farm corn farm. Rick was subletting one of his rooms to a Russian chain smoker whom we'll call Olga, and she was the same age as him, around 60. Rick is an a-hole 90% of the time and demands we never use his staircase to go up to the walking trail. His Russian friend and he also chain smoke in front of our living room window, making our house smell like an 80s-era bowling alley. Over the course of our renting this place, we got into numerous fights with these asshats over where they could smoke so that our side of the house didn't stink. The landlord lives in FL and uses the property as his retirement cash cow. We'll call the landlord Dwayne, and he's about 70 years old. The house itself was built in 1940 or earlier, and we lived on an old farm road with a pumpkin farm across the street. I just want you to have an image of the location because it'll come into play. The first week we're in the house unpacking, and my wife asks me to plug in the vacuum and run it around the downstairs to get up the styrofoam from the packing materials. I notice that the plug sparks when you plug or unplug anything. I call Dwayne and tell him, and he says, "Okay, call around and get a price from an electrician and let me know what it'll cost." This was a red flag for me. I'm paying $1,300 a month for this duplex, and now this guy wants me to do all his legwork since he is out of state. I figure whatever and find an electrician who'll charge $200 for the house call, plus the outlets he'll end up replacing. I call Dwayne and he says, "No, that's too much. I'll send one of my guys over to do it." This pisses me off because I just spent 20 minutes calling around getting ballpark quotes, but I figure it's fine as long as the work gets done. Fast forward 1 month, and his electrician finally shows up one day to do the work. He replaces 12 of the 14 outlets because he didn't think he'd find so many bad ones. I figure that's fine since the ones he didn't replace are in the room we never use. 2 months go by, and it's early spring, and it's raining a ton. One night we get a huge downpour that lasts for about 35 minutes. My wife says she hears water in the basement. I run down to the basement, and we have 2 waterfalls coming through the windows that look into the backyard, and there's 4 inches of water on the floor and rising. I call Dwayne the next morning and tell him about the windows in the basement and the flooding, and he says I need to find a cleaning service to clean up the mess. I tell him I can't because I'm going to work. He says, "Okay, do it after work then." I say, "Listen, I don't own this house, you do, so find someone today who can clean this up and repair the windows, or I'm going to do it myself and take it out of the rent, which is NY state law." He gets pissed and hangs up. Later in the evening he calls and says a cleaning service will be there in 2 days to clean the basement from all the mud and water. I tell him that's fine, but he might want to repair the windows since it's still raining pretty regularly. He says no, that won't be necessary since he's still getting quotes about a French drain for the back of the house. The cleaning crew shows up, and they clean the whole basement out. It takes them 6 hours with power washers and scrubbing machines, etc. They leave at 5 p.m. that day, and we're thinking, okay, great, now we have the basement cleaned up. But the windows aren't holding anything out since they are so old and have no sealant around the outside edges. 2 days go by, and it downpours again, filling the basement back up with water and mud. I call Dwayne, and he sounds defeated. He tells me that he'll send the cleaning crew back out the same day the contractors are going to show up with the backhoe for digging the French drain around the backside of the house. Fast forward 2 weeks, and everybody shows up. The work is completed, and we're happy to have a normal basement again, even though I'm pissed that we had a swamp down there for so long. 2 more months go by, and one night my wife screams while in the kitchen. She swears she saw a mouse in the kitchen run from under the sink to under the oven. I ask her what it looked like, and she says big gray and had pink ears. I know right away this isn't a field mouse, but a full-grown rat. I open the drawer below the oven, and all our cupcake pans are full of little rat turds, and it's nasty. Thankfully, we never bake, so they weren't a big loss. I call Dwayne, and he says he has an exterminator friend who lives nearby, and he'll call him and get back to me. Dwayne calls back the next morning and says, I spoke to my friend, and he claims that your dog going to the bathroom in the backyard is probably attracting the rats. I tell him, rats don't eat crap, so that makes no sense. We'll need to have an exterminator sent out to deal with this. Dwayne goes on a tirade about how we're the worst renters, and that we constantly complain about little things. I tell him, for $1,300 a month, I expect a rat-free, spark-free living space that doesn't flood or smell like a bowling alley. At this point, Dwayne says he'll look into it and hangs up. I'm super pissed at this point. We've had nothing but problems with this place from the first week, and now we've got rats in our kitchen. I do a little digging online and find out that you can have the health department investigate rat infestations, and if they see that the landlord isn't doing anything about it, they'll put a lien on the house until the work is complete. So obviously, I decided to go that route. I call the health inspector, and he tells me that he'll come out in a few days to do an inspection and get back to me. Dwayne calls me back and says the rat problem is my fault because I have a dog and that I need to deal with the problem myself. I tell him, no problem, I just set up an appointment with the health inspector. Dwayne gets really upset and curses me out. I call my lawyer and tell him to call Dwayne and arrange for us to break the lease since I don't want to deal with him anymore. Fast forward 2 months. The health inspector found a bunch of rats and holes in the foundation and evidence that the colony had been living in the house for years and years from the looks of it. He contacts Dwayne and tells him about the lien if he doesn't address it. Dwayne calls me and says he's sending an exterminator. At this point, I had put the place up on Craigslist to find new renters since Dwayne had decided to sublet our lease instead of letting us out of it. I found some college kids who were desperate for a place, and they seemed like typical rich college kids. I tell them that the place doesn't have AC and they'll need window units, etc. But I also tell them that the next-door neighbor is pot-friendly and loves smoking. I tell them that he is super chill and that they can totally use the staircase in the backyard to access the hiking trails. One of the kids brought his mom, who showed up in a new Jag, so I knew that Dwayne wasn't going to be able to crap all over these people since I knew they'd lawyer up. I never mentioned the rat infestation, or that this place was a nightmare because I knew that these kids' rich parents would go nuclear with a lawyer if they had to deal with this stuff. Dwayne accepted the new tenants and let us out of the lease. All it took was a few threats from my lawyer before I got my security deposit back. Fast forward 3 months. I drive by the old place to see what's happening. It looks like the college kids and Rick are off to a rough start. There's a plastic divider down the driveway to separate who gets what. There are beer cans all over the front yard, and Rick's truck is parked on the side lawn. He never did that when we lived there, so I'm sure these kids were driving him crazy with parking. Olga is nowhere to be seen since she probably jumped ship when the parties started. I don't know what became of the rats, but 2 months later I did another drive-by, and there was no furniture on our side of the house, which tells me everybody had left, and Dwayne wasn't making any money, which made me happy since he was a ducking prick. The next one is a petty revenge story. This isn't necessarily my proudest moment, but I am tired of being the outcast. My 32F husband, Pete, 34M, comes from a family where the women are all bakers. I am a baker myself, and I used to sell baked goods out of my house under my state's cottage laws, but I stopped because I like it just being a hobby. His sister-in-law, Kay, 39, is the one who is known for her cupcakes and cake pops. When I first met everyone years ago, it was the first thing I learned. Everyone talked about everything she made, Even when Pete mentioned how good my stuff was, everyone would say that Kay sells hers and they're popular, so they must be better. Whenever I bring treats, they are often left untouched because they are not Kay's. Yes, I've been told that. They ask me to bring something to every get-together and never touch it. To be clear, Kay is mainly a baker, whereas I bake and specialize in professionally decorated cakes. Kay says that overly decorated cakes are compensating for their bad taste, and Pete's family agrees. We had a BBQ on Monday for Memorial Day, and everyone made their treats. Kay decided to bring cake pops. She posted them on her Instagram the night before. So, and I know this is immature, I made the exact same ones she did, same flavor and design. We got there and everyone asked where my treats were. I said they're in the car and I'll get them in a minute. So I waited for everyone to be outside, then I brought mine in and put them next to Kay's. After we ate, I noticed the family eating my cake pops and not Kay's. She didn't notice at first and then asked if they weren't enjoying the cake pops. They said they just ate them and they were the best she ever made and asked what she did differently. Even my mother-in-law said they looked so much better in person than in the picture. Kay was confused and said hers were still on the table. That's when I said, "Oh, I brought those. Glad you enjoyed them." Her husband said he hadn't had one yet. Lies, he ate too. And everyone else just said, yeah, they were okay. Kay didn't say anything the rest of the night. Pete thought it was funny. He didn't know what I did until the reveal. But his brother, Kay's husband, said yesterday that what I did was mean, and I'm just mad that Kay is a better baker. But Pete said it's ridiculous that the family, including Kay, puts down my baking when they won't even try it because I'm not Kay. ETA. We aren't the only two who bring desserts, just the ones who tend to bake cakes more than others. Everyone else's desserts get eaten to some degree except mine. The next one is an entitled people story. I was in a serious drunk driving accident about 20 years ago. The car struck a sycamore tree at 50 miles per hour. Relax. The tree was fine. Me, not so much. I was in the front passenger seat and the engine came through the firewall and crushed my legs, and the hot metal gave me second-degree burns. I also had broken ribs, a cracked sternum, and a punctured lung from the seatbelt, bruised internal organs, a broken nose, and a bunch of broken teeth. I was a mess. My roommate, hereafter referred to as Cooter, was there because he had a cyst on his arm. He was a miserable wretch. Fresh air would have pissed him off. He idioted constantly about literally everything and maintained a baseline level of hostility toward everyone, even his girlfriend. She stopped visiting him after the first day I was awake, and for some reason he blamed the nurses for it. You would think he was being bitten by fire ants. Whenever he was asked to rate his pain from 1 to 10, his answer was always higher than 10. Cooter was a cook at a fire hall. I don't mean he cooked for firemen. At least in my area, a fire hall is a sort of blue-collar private club with cheap beer and greasy food. I knew what he did for a living because he periodically called the guy covering his shifts to micromanage him and argue about inconsequential bullcrap. Meanwhile, I'm lying there with 14 broken bones and teeth that hurt whenever they were exposed to air. I had a chest tube and couldn't go more than 5 or 10 minutes without coughing, which hurts like a mother ducker when you have broken ribs. When asked to rate my pain, I figured a 10 would be like if your organs were hanging out or you were missing large patches of skin, so I think the highest number I gave was 4. I was in a miserable shape, but I hated hearing Cooter verbally abuse the hospital staff. If it weren't for him, I might have snapped at someone occasionally. But instead, I made a point of always greeting them with as much cheerfulness as I could muster, and always saying please and thank you, and expressing appreciation loud enough for Cooter to hear. I was worried about taking too many opiates, so I would wait until the pain was getting close to unbearable before asking for more. At one point, I asked for pain meds, and there was a perfect storm of bad luck. My prescription had run out. They only write for 2 days of pain meds at a time when you're in the hospital. But it was shift change, and they couldn't find anyone who was on my treatment team to write a new one. It took almost 2 hours to get it sorted out. No one could have faulted me for being a bit cross. A few hours earlier, when they had brought us our lunch, Cooter had thrown an epic tantrum because he had asked for peas and was given corn. He started yelling obscenities at the staff and threw his tray across the room. It took a good 15 minutes to get him another tray, and he didn't stop yelling until it came. Even after it arrived, he wasn't mollified. He snapped at everyone who came in for at least the next hour about the bullcrap, half-assed operation they were running. So when I had to wait for relief from my pain, I took great satisfaction in remaining cheerful. The nurses kept apologizing every time they came in to check on me and give me a progress update. I kept assuring them that I knew they were doing their best and thanking them for their efforts. I repeatedly said, "Don't worry, it's not like you brought me corn or anything serious like that." When they did get someone to write a new prescription, they started me off with a shot, so relief was almost instantaneous. As it kicked in, I told the nurse who had administered it, "You are an angel of mercy, and I love you." I had a long, difficult recovery. When I left the hospital, I moved to a rented hospital bed in my brother's living room. I needed a wheelchair for 3 months and crutches for 7 or 8 months after that. I had 2 more surgeries over the next year and a half, and it was almost 3 years before I could return to work. In large part because of my experience sharing a room with Cooter, I never lost my sense of humor. The next one is an entitled parent story. I think every female family member who is the youngest of the adult generation, or at least a teen, can relate to this. Yesterday, we had a kind of big family function for the 80th birthday of my gran. My mother's younger sister was there with her kids, preschool, elementary school age. And like every single time, I, 20F, was expected to watch the little demons while her mother can have some adult time. Don't get me wrong, I like them, but in small doses, and I can't understand why it's me since her husband was there. Since the weather was nice, it was a BBQ in my gran's garden, or a backyard like Americans would say. It was good. I saw some cousins of my generation, some of them I haven't seen in years. So, since I had Saturday off, I work in healthcare, I shared a beer with my cousins and caught up. Well, then my aunt came in and asked why I dared to drink, since I have to watch over her kids today since she needs some adult time. I just asked her what about her husband, and she gave me the whole sob story of, "He worked all week. LOL, I did that too. Even made overtime in the nursing home I'm working in. And that's his day off. Again, mine too. And that he is on the grill. He's literally standing next to my uncle who is actually grilling and sips beer." So I looked her dead in the eye and chugged the entire beer that I just opened, 0.5 liter bottle. Looked her dead in the eye while my brother, the saint he is, took the empty bottle out of my hand and gave me a new one. I told her sorry, but I already drank. She left in a huff, and of course she told my mother and my gran, and of course, my mom was upset with me because she's my aunt and yada yada. The only ones on my side were my brother and my stepdad, who nearly pissed himself laughing when he heard what I did. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.